Good evening, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a provoking, enriching, and inspiring conversation. So just to give a little bit of context, this reconciliation and reparation workshop is the second of 3 workshops that our scholars will undergo, and it's arguably one of the most challenging, but I also think it presents the most opportunities for us to reimagine what Africa can look like when we do the healing work. So I'm very proud of what we've been able to, as a team, create over the past few years. It's been an iterative process. I remember 10 years ago, our mid-year workshop. I'm sure Judy has memories. We all can kind of recall what that experience was like for us. But it felt like a really defining moment for me. And I hope that it continues to be that for all of you. So here is to us prioritizing our individual and collective healing. I'm going to start by briefly introducing our 2 guests. They have received your full bios, so protocol has been observed. And of course, as always, we invite you to connect with us as human beings. So we read these things to kind of give us more information about you, but we also know that you're more than these things, right? So Lady Skollie, Laura Windvogel, but you've told us now you want to be called Skollie.
Laura Windvogel Mulifi, but I prefer people to just call me Skollie.
Okay. Yeah. Skollie it is an artist from South Africa. She graduated with a degree in History of Art and Dutch Literature from UCT in 2009. Filled with bold color, godlike figures, and suggestive fruits, Skollie's work revolves around themes of gender, sex, and the politics of lust, as well as her explorations of identity. Her work has been exhibited widely across South Africa and at a number of international solo and group exhibitions and art fairs. In 2019, she was commissioned to design the new fibre coin to commemorate 25 years of constitutional democracy in South Africa, which I believe you're wearing at the moment.
And they told me I'm not allowed to show any race or people or tribe, but I did. I showed the big-assed Bushman.
The coin is currently in circulation throughout South Africa, and she's the winner of the coveted Standard Bank Young Artist of the Year Award for 2022. Welcome.
Hello.
Sifiso is a Johannesburg-based multi-award-winning filmmaker and archive researcher. He recently completed a short film adaptation of Njabula Ndebele's The Prophetess, who you know is our former chair, which expands his vocabulary into the South African literary archive, having worked with audio and video archives in the past. His ongoing project, Black Joy Under Apartheid, foregrounds black leisure and pleasure under apartheid to offer counter-hegemonic narratives of black victimhood. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
You know, the way that the MRF thinks about reconciliation is really beginning with the self, and understanding the need for self-reconciliation in order for us to reconcile at a more societal level, and that it needs to be paired with reparation, right? For reconciliation to be meaningful and to really do the work that we needed to do in our country and continentally, it needs to be paired with reparation. So really holding those 2 things side by side. This conversation is really an exploration of how we bring in our personal stories, how we're thinking about reconciliation and reparation within our own lives, within your work. What are some of the questions that you kind of holding? What are some of the provocations that maybe you've come across in recent years? And we've intentionally asked 2 creatives because we think it's really important to have that voice in this conversation. But the first sort of question, which I'm going to ask us all to answer, the 4 of us, and then we'll shift the focus a little bit more to the 2 of you, is around identity and reflecting on the first time in your life when you became aware of your identity and how that shaped your idea or conception of self. And I'm happy to kick it off, and then we can flow from there. And it's such a profound moment that I still think about, and I really, if I go back to the 7-year-old me, I really feel like a lot of what happened in that instance informs who I am and how I see the world and how I choose to engage with it. So at the time, we were living in Pretoria, in Centurion, which used to be called Verboedstad, or something like very Afrikaans, which was like the epicenter of apartheid. And I was 7, it was sort of post-94, so it was 1996 to be exact. one of the first sort of racially inclusive schools. And I remember even at the time, the place we were staying in Irene, we were like one of the only families of color. And went to school, and yeah, I was just always gravitating towards people who didn't necessarily look like me, but I was like, yep, we're vibing. You're a cool person, I'm a cool person, let's be friends. And there was one particular day where someone who wasn't necessarily in my friendship circle came to me and asked this question, what are you? Not who are you, what are you? Referring to like, we can't quite place you. You know, you've got this brown skin, you don't really look like us, you don't really sound like what's happening here. And I didn't know how to answer. So I went home and I told my dad. It was like a winter evening, the fireplace was going, and I was just reflecting on my day, and he was like, how did it go at school today? And I was like, yeah, I got asked this really weird question. And he was like, what is it? And I'm like, no, someone asked me, like a kid in my class asked me what I was. And I think he kind of was a bit taken aback, and he was like, the next time someone asks you that, tell them that you're human. And that wasn't something at that age that I ever thought I would have to, but it was so profound, it stuck with me, and I think it informs how I engage with people today. Like, seeing people's humanity, choosing to see the ways in which we are connected, the ways in which I am because of the next person. So that's kind of my first experience of where I was like, oh, this is a thing. The color of my skin is a thing, or how I look is a thing. But I'd love to hear from the three of you what that was like.
Are you going to go from me, or are you going to go from...
We can spice it up. Who wants to go? Who's moved?
I want to go, please. Okay. I've got a few. My first was that I went to what is now perceived as a Model C school. So it's a school that used to it was historically white. And then when apartheid ended, black parents automatically thought the best thing they could do for their children was to take their money and put their children in schools that were Model C schools, and like put their children in a school, And I think that also just started the what are you kind of conversations nonstop. But I've got a few ones. I think my first one was when I was an artist and I would love to draw, and a white child told me that they wanted to use my crayon that was menskleur. So in English, that means human color. And the child was like, can I use your human color crayon? And I was like, what is human color? And they pointed to this disgusting pink crayon. And they were like, that is a human crayon. And I was like, human? Ew! Like, I'm not that color, so am I not a human? Okay, so that's my most basic one. But then also I have an ostrich story where we went to the Karoo with my school when I was 12 years old. And they said, who has black hair? And they were like, Laura has black hair. And then they put me in the middle of a kraal, which is like a encampment or an enclosure in English. And they were like, just stand super still. And then they poured the things you make popcorn with. They poured it into my hair because I had short black hair. And they poured it into my hair and they were like, all you've got to do is stand really still. And then like 50 ostriches came and pecked my head. Okay, my third one just moving along, is that I went to a school where all the white children thought they were better than me, but all their parents were wardens at Pollsmoor. So all of our school outings, we went to Pollsmoor. Okay, for R1. Okay, and then my other racial vibe was when white people tell you speak really nice. Okay. My fourth one was that my mom paid a lot for my twang. She paid a lot for this twang, so I will use it. My fifth one was that there's this term called kham, which they use for coloreds. So they'll say if you're a colored who's not trying to be a white, like they're not trying to be talking like, then they'll call you kham, and it's like you don't want to be kham, And if you go in the Bible, kham is an actual person. Okay, my fifth one.
How many do you have, Laura?
Oh, this is my last one, okay. Sorry. I know you're big on time. My last one is that colorism in coloreds. So if you're a light colored, you're better. But if Edward was my brother, he'd be like the lowest level of my family. And so when I was in a family, my mother and her sister used to call their brother Idi Amin, if you know Idi Amin, because he was like a little bit darker. So they'd be like, oh, he's Idi Amin, and I'd be like, who the F is Idi Amin? Like, I didn't get it. So that's me.
Thank you for sharing. That is a lot. I feel like we need a moment to process, but...
Yeah, I'll go next because it sort of builds upon what Skollie was saying. And I grew up, I think I shared it earlier the week, in a sort of part of Cape Town called the Cape Flats, which is essentially where they put all colored people after sort of the Group Areas Act and forced removals. And my grandparents moved from Sea Point. Oh, imagine I had a house in Sea Point, Gal. To a place called Kalksteenfontein, right? And I grew up in a very homogenous community, so I didn't really sort of encounter, white people, black people, Indian people, any other people but colored people. So for me, like, that was fine. However, what Laura said was, in the colored community, there's deep sort of colorism, and I think everyone can sort of relate to this. And for me, my sort of first awakening to my identity was an aggregation of being called Idi Amin, being called the K word, being called the D word. Yeah. And to me, I was like we're the same. Like, we have the same parents, we have the same grandparents, but the nature of our community is that siblings can look vastly different. Cousins can look vastly different. So when I came to realize that I am not giving. You can laugh.
He's giving black.
Yeah. Literally, right? And I don't think I've ever felt more dehumanized. I don't think I ever felt more isolated by people who were my own people. Yeah. And that's my story.
Thanks for sharing, Ed. Sifiso.
I'm still trying to figure it out. I don't have an identity. No, I'm being serious here. I think, I've had similar experiences, and whether it was race when I was, about 5-6 years old, trying to play with a white girl and being pushed away and thinking, is this about my blackness or is it about class? Having, richer cousins who told me not to open the fridge when I went to visit them. I think for me though, but I was also like always, I was always kind of like very different, like in growing up. So even with my own family members and my choices of how I express things, it was always sort of highlighted that I do things differently. I'm left-handed. I, grew up listening to rock music and studying rock bands. And so for me, just the question of identity and its discovery. So the question of identity and its discovery is like a perpetually unfolding one, because I'm just like, does it still matter? I'm 43 years old. Does it still matter who I am? I don't care, because I think it's also just about how the world sees you, right? And if you're allowed to change how you see yourself whenever you want, then it's a different kind of story. And I think that's sort of what I've kind of moved with. I don't listen to rock anymore. I listen to jazz, and I'm a father of 2 kids. I'm very serious, and I make serious documentaries. But, there's a time where I was a completely different person. And so for me, I don't want this to sound like, like esoteric and deep, and I've never really been interested in discovering myself, and the times where I enjoy my own company, and it's the development of who I think I am at that time, but it's constantly evolving. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think thank you for surfacing that there are many dimensions to our identity, right? Like the three of us were touching on race, but like class, gender. Like there's so many other aspects of identity, and it's like the reminder of the intersectionality of it, and also like for you trying to really understand, why am I being asked to unpack? Why am I being asked to, look within in terms of these sorts of things? Because for you it felt like an evolution, and it felt like there was no need to, you were never static in time, and there was always an invitation for you to, be who you were at a particular time without the confinement of, you are this thing, and now you are this thing. Yeah. Okay, so we've obviously been speaking about reconciliation this week, and one of the questions that we have for you is around, what do you feel needs to be reconciled within yourselves?
Oh, you're looking at me. Okay. Hold on.
We can also start with Sifiso.
It's funny because when we met earlier on and we were talking about being parents and parenting, I had absolutely zero tools to father someone, let alone two of them. But what struck me about my approach was I didn't know what kind of parent I wanted to be, how I wanted to do this parenting thing. But what I did know is that I didn't want to be my parents or use my parent styles or methods of parenting. And so it was such a difficult place to operate from, because I feel like that's mostly what I've inherited in the parenting business, right? And it comes out in the most awkward and, inconvenient times where you just like, you find yourself shouting like your father, or, talking like your mother, and you realize that, hey, this comes quite automatically. So there are things about me that maybe I haven't reconciled or, haven't dealt with so well, because the thing that I'm rejecting the most is the one that sort of comes out quite strongly in times where I have very little control over my emotions. And so then it becomes about that, and then it becomes like a bigger thing. And this cloud of just thinking about your parents now becomes, you are now a parent, but you're now the child, because you're constantly thinking about your parents, and now you're thinking about parenting your parents, because now you realize that they were infallible, and they had flaws, and so it kind of, it's such a scary thing when it happens, when you realize that, actually, I could use a little bit more grace in relating to my parents, because I had to deal with a lot. And maybe by that, reading, I deserve a little bit more grace because I'm doing a lot, and so there's just like this thing of like constantly, reckoning with what that position, that role, means. It's not easy, but it's a constant. I'm healing me, but because I'm trying to heal my child before anything happens, because I'm also trying to heal my parents from their baggage that they took with them. So but yeah, just the task of constantly being aware of your role in a space all the time is not easy.
It's hard work.
What was the question?
Yeah.
What are you needing to reconcile within yourself?
What I have to reconcile with myself is not having patience. And so I think sometimes, a lot of people perceive me in a specific way. I think that's also my problem with my practice, is that I'm perceived in a very specific way that I definitely set up myself. Like, it's not like anyone projected that onto me and I was like, oh, why are they doing this to me? I did it to myself. But I'm a very different person now. I never wanted to have children. Now I have a child, and I'm like completely different about everything. But I think how I reconcile this reparations thing in myself is to understand that people are people. So at the end of the day, you take what they taught you in their white universities and you just use it against them. That's what I did. The other day, for the first time ever, I opened my transcription, and I know that my transcript? Is it called transcript? Sorry, I wouldn't know what it's called because I wasn't very engaged university student like all of you here. I know that I can see on your faces of what I can see with the blurry vision because I took my glasses off, and it makes me feel less judged when I can't see people's faces, is that I really was a bad university student. Very, very bad. When I opened my transcript, I was like, I've got a degree. You know what I mean? I went to university merely for the fact that I wanted to see people who weren't like me. I went to a very staunch Afrikaner school where people's parents were wardens at Polsmoor, and they didn't have an art wing, and so I would go to an extracurricular school almost 3 to 4 times a week, and I didn't really relate to people. But when you colored, or so-called colored, meaning like you take on what people project onto you, you try to be something that is not offensive to people, and you try to like be in a way that is kind of like in between. And we were made to be in between on purpose, and we were made in between by force, and we were made in between not like because we chose it, but because someone else chose it for us. And so I think being a so-called colored in South Africa, and I say so-called colored because I know a lot of people don't want to be seen as colored, they want to be seen as something else. I'm very confused. My parents are from the Winelands. I went to a white Afrikaner school. I went to a white university. I went to UCT. I don't understand what it means to really be this first people of South Africa, meaning we're the first people that people found here, and all of a sudden we have to be something else. So I think my whole practice is centered around trying to just understand what it means to be Hillary Banks. Like trying to understand what it means to be a person who wants to like act like they're better than others. That's a very colored thing to be. You're always like, I'm the little lady above everybody else. But like, it's a very difficult place to be at the end of the day. And so for me, within my practice, I try to like question that, and I try to understand that, and I try to be like, why in my mind would I be better than someone who's dark skinned? Or why would I be better than Cape Malays who are from Bengal? It's a very complex way and a very weird set of origin. So that's my answer.
And you feel like your art and your practice enables you to grapple with this meaningfully.
I always tell people that one thing that people don't know about Bushmen, because I'd like to imagine myself to be a modern day Bushman, is that when the settlers come, so I don't see, 5 years ago I would have said a race, but now I say the settlers. When the settlers came, we were stopped in our tracks. We got chicken pox and 90% of us died. And so it's I don't know if anyone in this room has seen cave drawings. Cave drawings are tiny. They're like this big, right? If you see them in real life. And so my works are very big, they're very garish, they're very like enveloping, they're huge, And so I would like to see my practice to be something that would have happened if it wasn't interrupted by people coming here and stopping us in our tracks. I called it nipped in the bud, because that's quite cute. It's like a flower that's blooming and then someone just steps on it, But if we were nipped in the bud, what could have happened? Because my paintings are massive, they're enormous, Maybe something else would have been the truth for us. At the moment, I'm just very confused. I'm trying to understand who I am within the context of being a so-called colored in the South African context. Sometimes I think it's actually much easier to be black because at least people have their languages. We don't even have language, We have Afrikaans, which is my problematic fave, because she is definitely a language that was actually made by slaves and then repackaged within advertising, fundamentally. They saw this, what the Swedish people did at the Olympics, and they were like, what if we made Afrikaans ours, But Kitchen Dutch was something that coloreds used to talk to each other outside of the ear of the oppressor. And so they made it their own. And so a lot of people think that Afrikaans is this thing that's made to oppress people, which it was, but it was made that way
Yeah.
by the oppressor. So yeah, it's a very complex way of being in South Africa. You know, me and Edward, we are literally kin, and my grandmother looks like him, you know. And so it's just very freaky to be in a place. We're even in Table Bay right now, where people used to just chuck women into the bay, you know, sewed into Hessian sacks, so that they can't swim and so that they will just drown and sink to the bottom of the ocean. And so it's also just a weird place to be and talk about these things. But at the end of the day, you know, we're in 2024. We're trying to figure out what it means to be this in this time.
Thank you. Ed.
So
Handing over.
deep, and thank you. There's just so much gratitude. Yeah, it is so crazy, right? And all week we've really been tussling with a lot of what you were speaking about around, reconciling what it means to be us in this sort of dislocated world in which we live, right? And as I was sort of thinking about this conversation and really passing through like what can be some of the themes we were speaking about, I was thinking about the root word of reparations, which is repair, right? And I went to Uncle Google and Googled it. And it derives from the Latin verb reparare, meaning to repair, right? Which is to restore by replacing a part or putting together what is torn or broken. And I was thinking, can we really think about repair as pulling things together, fixing things, when everything in this world feels like it's falling apart? And I happened upon the work of the Nigerian psychologist, philosopher, and author, Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, who rethinks repair as repair. So hyphen's what you call it, right? Re-pair, right? And thinking of repair not as pulling things together, but as pairing anew. And he describes it as, and I quote, as a sensuous, post-humanist, alliance-building inquiry that calls for a different kind of experimentation at the edges of what we call human. According to him, to really repair is to repair, right? Repair. To break the pairings we are in and get lost a bit. And to me, how I interpret this is unpairing with systems, ways of being, relations, communities, even people that might not be serving us.
Thank you.
Right? And to repair in new ways, right? That is life-giving, that really fosters genuine repair, connection, and progress.
And that humanizes.
And that humanizes, exactly. Yeah. So as we sort of think about repair in sort of Dr. Akomolefe's work around repairing and pairing anew, I'm curious from our guests here, in your mind and from your sort of vantage points, what are the pairings, the ways of being, the systems, the relations, the practices that are currently paired that need to be unpaired? Right? And how do you think about this through the work that you guys do?
Sifiso
welcome to MRF, baby.
Sifiso looks like he's got a response.
No. It's a loaded question. I was just trying to absorb as much as I could. And also as someone who works with archive, I make films and documentaries first. But I'm also an archive researcher in the visual space in, doing archive research for other filmmakers or, other films. And so the thing that I constantly battle with in my practice is just constantly being, it feels like you're living in the past. You're constantly stuck with these images of what it means to be South African, what it meant to be South African in the past, but you also, when you get out of the archive, the kind of society that that history was building is reflected back at you. So you see, the architecture that we have in South Africa, it still kind of feels very much like a continued colonial project, right? But also in our visual architecture. So, you look at South African advertising and you look at the images there, and then you realize that there's actually very little that we've kind of like done differently. You look at apartheid special planning and how it's still intact. People who are the majority of the workforce staying in townships, and they ferry over to the economic centers, which were the towns, which back in the day were not allowed to stay up until a particular time, and then moving back. So then there's more questions than answers about where we are, about what we need to repair, or what I also refer to as remember. So remembering, putting something together. And so for me then, it's really just about whether there are ways in which we can imagine a new way of being as South Africans, because we had this, what the world calls a miracle moment in 1994, that kind of, for me, in some ways also kind of maybe stops us from thinking about how we can imagine a new South Africa, maybe not the one that we inherited in 1994. So for me, your question leads to more questions, and some of the glimpses of the answers that come are not quite friendly, because I imagine we'd have to try and eradicate everything that we know about who we are and start all over again from scratch. And I don't know what it takes to do that. So, yeah. Laura, maybe I'll ask you.
I want to talk about the girl who makes my clothes. She once invited me to this dinner, and I was at this dinner, and there was this guy who is a queer gardener, and he was telling me, there's all these people that own land in South Africa and who discover things on their land in South Africa. And, it's a law that if you find things on your land, you're supposed to go to the government and tell them that it's there so that other people can have access to the land. But what people really do in this modern South Africa is that they use a new thing called an angle grinder. And so they angle grind cave surfaces out so they can sell it on eBay. Or they will sell the things that they find in the land, they will sell it online to other farmers, or they'll swap it out, And then if they're a nice farmer, they'll collect all the things they find in the land for maybe 3 years, put it in a giant plastic trash bag, and in the middle of the night, they'll leave it at the door of a university for people to investigate or look at or whatever. And I think that's what brings me back to where my practice is from. My practice is trying to understand, where would Bushman art be if the people that came here didn't interrupt us? What would have been there instead? And so when I hear things like this from white people, it's quite scary to me, because I'm like, oh, so people just literally collecting Bushman jawlines and spearheads and bodies and bones and things, and then they just put it in a trash bag and they leave it in the middle of the night at a university, which is apparently the best way to do it, because people don't want to open their land. So it brings us back to the land question and, expropriation, all of that. I think my practice was touched firstly by a white teacher who told my mother that we can't teach this child anymore when I was 9 years old, and she was like, is my mic even on? And she was like, you should go to this school, which was formerly known as Frank Joubert Art and Design Center. It's now known as the Peter Clark Art and Design Center, because Peter Clark was our queer black/colored legend, and they renamed the school after him. I went there from the age of 8 until 18. And so I had 10 years of living an art life. I was going to this very staunch Afrikaner school, but after school, 4 days a week, I was going to this place where I met black people. I had never met any black people in my entire life. Went there, met black people who were also in art. I met left-handed people who I never met before. There was like 20 left-handed people in my group, and I was like, I'm also left. I'm a hot glow, as they say in Afrikaans, you know. I think in my practice, South Africa is the most intense place because there is just so much unresolved tension, violence, ideas, you know, even my ideas might not be correct, you know, because there's just so many other people who might have different ideas. I think in the past 5 years, definitely I've become to a place where I'm very much more graceful. Like I actually hear people out even when they're wrong. Like I'll listen to them. And I think that my practice has just been influenced by how complex this country really is, you know. I know that we like to pretend that we're the prefect of Africa, which we definitely are not, because unlike other South Africans, I've been many places in Africa. I've been to Ghana, I've been to Kenya, I've been to Uganda, I've been everywhere, babe. Like I've been to Nigeria, you know. So I just find that South Africa sometimes also cuts themselves off because in their minds they think they are the authority on what it is to be African. But just to look a little bit at Ghanaians, you know, they've had independence much longer than any people on this continent. And what they've done with the independence is very interesting, you know. We at the beginning of that, in my opinion, you know. The things we're going through is things they've gone through. And so,
we need more humility to learn.
Yes, and on my notes, I actually
countries.
have a thing that I very quickly will talk about because I'm very good at summarizing. But in 2017, I was feeling very down. I got an email from Kenya, and it said there's this thing called The Gathering, and all you have to do is pay half of your flight. And I was like, my life is feeling very down right now, and I don't actually care if I'm being trafficked or if something's happening because my life is just whack. Like, I'll go. Okay, I'll give them 3,800 Rand to get to Kenya and see what happens. And I went to this thing called The Gathering, and it was very similar to this, if I'm going to be honest. It was leaders of thought at the time within the fine arts community, including William Kentridge. Where do we go where he's not included, please? He's so annoying. He's so annoying. And so I went to this place, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll go. And I was just with like 50 people from the continent, and talking about what it means to be African. What does it mean to try to understand yourself within your practice when you don't even understand each other? And I think what really stuck with me through all these years is that at the end of the day, when we really look at each other, we're very similar. And our journeys of healing is very similar, whether we want to admit it or not. And so I think, I can't even remember what the question was. But my answer is that we won. Simunie. Literally. We are literally one. And for us to just like talk to each other in situations like this, to have people be able to pay for us to all to get here and to all talk to each other, you know, in years to come, we'll think about it and be like, oh my God, maybe that was the beginning of my own individual healing, you know. Life is not linear, healing is not linear, and we talk about our parents and the things they had to go through, but wouldn't you have done the same thing? Because that's what I feel like. I feel like if, you know, I want to talk so much about my parents because they are so annoying, but I would have done the same thing. Things are hard, guys. Life is hard. So imagine how much harder it was if you were systematically excluded from everything. Wouldn't you also have had some kind of coping mechanism to not have to think about it or deal with it, you know? Yeah.
And that's a big part of... That's a big part of...
Also, I'm colored, so I laugh after everything that's serious. Sorry.
What we invite our scholars into when doing this work, right? Compassion.
Yeah.
Compassion for self, compassion for others. And really, trying to understand people's journeys and trying to understand that things are hard and that even if I've reflected on my parents and now that I'm a parent, it's like you think about it in a new way, but they did the best that they could. and having that compassion and empathy, because you're now in a position where you've got your own, lived experiences of it. But yeah, thank you both. Ed, I don't know if you want to probe a bit deeper or if you want to open it up.
I think let's open it up. No.
Okay. We are going to take questions from the floor. I ask that you introduce yourself and then state who your question is directed to. So, who is going to kick us off? Sakina. Okay, and yeah, the mic. Do we have another mic to move around? Oh, thank you. Thanks, Nisha.
Hi, my name is Sakina. I'm from Tanzania. I've actually got a question for both. Am I allowed to do that? Okay, so my question to Laura is that you've shown up. I've never interacted with you. I've seen a bit of your work, but you've shown up in such an original manner. You come across as fearless. You're not scared of judgment. At least that's the impression I'm getting. You're unapologetic in how you behave and how you speak and how you share. And you're doing that in a world that's quick to judge and that's quick to attach importance to superficial things and to add value in that manner. How do you maneuver the world? How do you show up so unapologetically? And what advice would you have for someone who's trying to maneuver themselves?
I would say that every single time I've pretended to be what I'm not is when the art world has rejected me, or any world for that matter. I think that as I sit here, I know that I just look like a little baby child. But I'm 37 almost, and I have had a long time to understand what art really means to me. And art is life, And so when you try to pretend to be something you're not, is when you're rejected. Every time I've pretended to be something I'm not, I don't get into the job I want. I don't get the award I want, There's something I've always wanted to win, which is the Standard Bank Young Artist Award. It's something that most people don't even understand what it really means to win that award. But when I was 12 years old, I decided I would win it. And when my time came, which was at the age of 36, because that's when they cut you off, I had not heard from Standard Bank. I just assumed that I didn't win it. And I was like, it's just their problem. And so I will do something else which will feed me, which is have a baby, which is something I've never even considered. And I had a baby, I was pregnant, and then they messaged me and they were like, oh, by the way, you won, And I think at the end of the day, everything I've ever wanted in this life, I have gotten because I've wanted it and only because I've been myself. I think also in this time of social media, it's very easy to feel chased. It's very easy to feel like, another year's passed and you haven't done what you said to yourself you would do. And I would definitely say, as a person of color, that you should be softer on yourself. You should just have grace, because as people of color, we often have grace with so many other people that are like pieces of shit. And we're like, oh, this person, you forgive them and you think about them. But you should be thinking and forgiving yourself, It's hard out there. And once you get it, you can get it. So just be soft on yourself. And, I always bring it up because I love this lady. Sorry, I'm so evil. I usually say the B word for all ladies. But anyway, I love this lady, and she's called Kate Bush. And she brought out a song called Running Up This Hill, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. And yes. And she literally wrote that song in 1979, and it did what it had to do. And then in 2022, she made more money than she's ever made in her entire career from that one song. And so I think in a modern day, we often think that like making art is about making money. And it's really not. It's about putting something in this world that will change the world. And if it changes your life, that's an added benefit. But you'll be surprised how many people will message you, talk to you, tell you, this thing you did changed my life. This thing you did pushed me to do that. And so if the thing you didn't change your life, it doesn't mean it's not going to change everybody else's life. And so I think, like, the biggest reward of this life is just to be yourself, because you never know where it will take you. Whether it's 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future, you can go there. Anyway, let's put this out in the world that maybe something I do will make me a millionaire in 10 years.
Manifest, girl, manifest. Thank you. You've got a part B, Sakina.
Yes. And then for Mr. Sifiso, my question was, when Coralie sent out the email that said that we're watching the movie A New Country on Monday night. Yes. I looked up.
I'm so sorry. I don't remember that. I wish you guys could play a clip on like a screen. He told me where I was, what I was wearing, and everything. So I know I was in it.
You were, yes. Okay. I didn't look at a trailer. I just wanted to come in fresh and just experience the whole thing from start to finish. And you captured a lot of raw emotion in there: anger, resentment, repression. People spoke about what they really felt. And I'm sure as an edited movie, that was only a fraction of what you experienced while making it, what we're getting as the end product. I thought I would see someone today who's also very firm, who's present. I don't know how to put it, but someone who takes up space, and you know that this is someone who's aware of the resentment and the anger that's present in South African black society. But you've come across as a very peaceful person, someone who is exuding a very calm energy. You're talking about being a parent and about being gracious towards your parent. How are you balancing that? How are you so aware of that but just so calm?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'm genuinely serious.
No, that's a really good question, because and it's come across so many times in different ways, right? And the one way that this question has been asked is how my work, so my films, but also the archive work that I do, deals with a difficult history. And someone actually asked me, what do you do? Do you go to therapy after every film, or every project? Or why aren't you always angry all the time if you have to deal with such a violent history? I don't know, and I think that maybe, sure, reparations. Ne? We need reparations.
Reconciliation.
It's really just like, believing that the work will, transform people's opinions about what is happening, because what you're addressing in that moment, in making that film or in uncovering that piece of archive that could potentially, sort of shine a light on injustices in this country, your work is already done, and I think you said something to this effect as well, Laura, that you, when you do the work, it's not about how it addresses, your own gratifications, but if it goes out there, even just a spark to, to young people who are questioning, the status quo, the identity, this messy place called South Africa, then you have done that. But I think I have the privilege of just curating conversations within my films. So, I always hold a very specific point of view, but I'm not the one who's constantly has to drum up, or whose voice is out there saying these things all the time. And I think that as a filmmaker, we can also sort of hide behind, people that we align with, get them to say these things, and then, shape them up to be, an overarching opinion. I mean, I hope that answers your question, but I haven't really resolved it fully. I probably do need to go to therapy for always just dealing with such a difficult history.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see Lily's hand, so we'll move to that table next. Hello, please introduce yourself.
I'm Lily van Rensburg. I'm from South Africa. Is that enough?
What are you studying?
I am studying curatorial practice at Wits. My question is for Lady Skollie. I mean, yeah, how do I start? The South African kind of art world hinges on the very capitalist gallery system.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you continue to make work that is somewhat critical in a system which is by nature so exploitative of artists.
That's a great question. In 2017, I was represented for the first time by a gallery, and it was a foreign gallery. And I think that's very indicative of South Africa and how they treat, especially their artists of color. I remember in 2012, I was doing very similar work, and a white girl from the Netherlands told me that I wouldn't go anywhere because my work wasn't black enough, because I wasn't doing work about township life, you know. And that was indicative of a time when people were fetishizing Africa and South African art world for what they wanted the gap to fill, you know. When I was represented in South Africa for the first time, it was only because I'd been represented for almost 2 years abroad and not here. And South African galleries were telling me stuff like my work wasn't African enough, because it didn't display a certain idea that the West had of Africa. This is not to go against anyone who is making this type of work. It's just to tell you what people thought of African work at that time, which was about 2012 to 2014. People were thinking that if you didn't show that you lived in a shack, if you didn't show that you were living in a specific way in South Africa, you weren't showing South African work, you know. And I just remembered thinking, this is so crazy. Like, I'm talking to a white woman from abroad about what it means to be African. And I just, you know, because I'm light, people think, you know, I'm not African or whatever that might mean in that way. I don't feel offended by those things because it's definitely just ignorance. But I think how I navigated is that when I wanted to come into South Africa and be represented within a South African context, I definitely shopped around. Most galleries used to say things like, I'm too on social media, I think I'm too cute, I always show my face. You know, a very famous, and I'll call her name because I literally wish she would sue me, Mary Corrigal used to say that, if she wasn't pretty, would anyone be looking at the art? And that sticks with me, you know, because I know I'm hot, but I also know that I'm South African. And it was just crazy to me that a white woman would say that about me with her entire chest, you know. And I definitely I've prayed and I've definitely witchcrafted to the point where I hope she thinks of me at all times. But for me, doing it in a South African context is that I asked a woman called Anne Roberts, you know, who do you think would be best for me? And she said, it's not that gallery, it's not that other gallery, it's definitely not that other gallery. But there's this gallery that's been around for 10 years less than the governing party, which is the ANC. And she was like, there's this gallery that's 10 years younger than the ANC. They are people who are the people who brought up Moses Clady. You know, Moses Clady was a gardener at this gallery, and they were like, oh my God. And he was the first black man to show in Ezekiel. They were a gallery who were, called ugly names because of what they perceived to believe about black artists in this country. And so when I got with Everard Reed, I got with it knowing that they were a gallery of this age. They were a gallery of that power. And when I go for white money, I'm going to go for the oldest white money. And it has been an incredible journey with them, you know. A foreign gallery tried to entrap me with debt, which is something I think they use on a lot of black artists or artists of color. You know, they'll be like, oh, your work isn't selling. Maybe don't you want like £5,000 and you can live off this money and you don't have to sell anything. And it feels amazing when it's happening. And then at the end of the day, you're just a music star. You know, who wants to be a music star? Music stars are the guys that they trap into little cages with advances and things like that. And so when I got with my gallery, I was already in £7,000 debt with a gallery who was saying they couldn't sell my work. And my new representative gallery was like, this woman is evil. Do you want me to pay her off all at once or bit by bit to irritate her further? And that's why I love Everard Reed. They cleared my debt, they've showed me the world, and they've taken the minimal of what most galleries take in this country. Saying that, I'm also talking about the fact that I represented myself for 4 years, and no artist should be on WhatsApp messaging people about what their art is worth. It's just so dehumanizing. It's like you don't want to be involved in that. And so I think within this structure, I have definitely carved myself a hole that is mine, and anyone that gets into that hole will have to, shape themselves into my shape, because a lot of people haven't done that. People who have been represented by them longer than me don't even know where the kitchen is. I'm like, how do you know where to get the wine? And they're like, we don't know where the kitchen is. I'm like, babe, follow me, And I think one thing about so-called colored culture is that colored culture is very much based on word of mouth. It's very much based on colors talking to each other and informing each other about our real origins and where we're really from. And just so in that same way, when I'm in the gallery and other people of color are being represented, I'm like, baby, follow me. You know what I mean? It's one thing saying it, and it's one thing living it. I've seen how other artists live in the other galleries, and I don't know. I don't want to talk shit about other galleries, but I don't know. I don't think anyone's having as much of a fun time as me. Yeah.
We love it for you.
That's my answer.
Yes, I can't. Wayne.
Good evening. This one is for Sifiso. Hi, sir. We watched the my name is Wayne Dlodlo. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm studying a master's in banking law. So we watched A New Country, and I would just say it was very helpful. If you ever hadn't had someone tell you, we do read those little sentences in documentaries, and one of the things that was very helpful was that maybe we had misconceptions about the TRC, where we thought it was this way. Then you find out, no, there was more than that. There was recommendations of how much, recommendations of ways to go forward. So we can't put all the blame on that, or even we have to be open to being corrected about how we view something that seemed so set in stone that we didn't even think of revisiting. At least I speak for myself. So I wanted to ask: is there a realization of being sort of like an educator in your documentaries? This idea that certain things have been taken for granted, and as you start to realize through maybe archives or historical analysis that maybe we're not so informed, do you then embrace that role in your documentaries? And also, how do you choose how do you select what exactly to reveal to people? Because sometimes there's leaves and branches, right? You know that this is a branch. This is an important thing to discuss. This is also, but maybe for now, I'm going to focus rather on this aspect that I've noticed.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, a big part of my work is really just about the leaves and branches. And, sometimes there are aspects of our history that are just so harrowing, so violent, and you have to think about whether or not this is the right time to be having a conversation about how bad things were. And then, there's sort of like small nuggets, like the TRC, like how we, at a particular time, I guess, in our reconciliation evolution, we think about certain people. So there'll be times where we all say, oh no, Mandela was a sellout. And then there's like, this big narrative that says Mandela was sellouts, it's at universities, it's in the newspapers, it's everywhere. And then, we'll do the same thing with, like, say, someone like Desmond Tutu, for example, where it's just like a popular narrative at the time. And so I think that part of my work also addresses that, to say that, it's more complex than that, Our history is always, always, always more complex than just putting broad strokes on people. And even some of the things are even transform even me as the person who's trying to tell the story. So that is a really good example. The TRC, for example, the overriding narrative was that the TRC was a lost cause and it was performative, and, Desmond Tutu was put in that position to do exactly that, sort of, to appeal to the consciences of the masses and pretend as though, there was going to be forgiveness and reconciliation where there was very little participation from, say, white sectors of our community, of our country, and then everyone else who was there was a victim pretty much. And so when you learn that it was actually the recommendations document was actually quite a radical document, in that it made recommendations for a wealth tax on private businesses, but it also made calls for reparations and a wealth tax on individuals, on white individuals who were making a certain amount of money. So I think those are interesting details about, pieces of our history that we don't talk about every day. And you get into a particular space where maybe you even follow that thinking to be like, Desmond Tutu was a sellout, or, and then certain things get revealed to you, and you have the opportunity to then go out to the world and say, actually, this is not it. This narrative that we're peddling right now is just, doesn't even touch on the surface of, who this person was, or, what that history or that period in our history dealt with. So yes, absolutely. But I think also, just as an archive researcher, that is pretty much the premise of my role, is to constantly uncover or excavate pieces of history or perspectives that can in some way shape or reshape public opinion. And so I really get excited when I find things like that in the archive that sort of tell a different story, or that maybe even just are pieces of evidence for something that's kind of mythologized, that we have no evidence of, but talk about all the time, and then you actually see it. So that's the exciting work. I think a lot of people would find it boring, but it's really exciting for me.